Hey there and welcome to Baldur's Gate 3. Yes, after praising the game in both of my previous two channel update videos, I think it's time. Honestly, I haven't had this much fun playing a new video game since I picked up RimWorld, but if you have, for some reason, no idea what to expect, Baldur's Gate 3 is basically 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons as a video game. Yes, I know that simplifies things quite a bit, but the core mechanics are mostly the same. The outcome of most of our actions will be determined by dice rolls, so building a good character suitable for these actions is key, role-playing is at the heart of an absolutely fantastic story, and combat is turn-based. In other words, if you have enjoyed story-heavy RPGs like the Mass Effect series or tactical turn-based games like XCOM, I think you might also enjoy this one. In addition, this is the kind of game where the completionist approach has you double-checking pretty much every single item and NPC, because no matter how mundane or insignificant they might seem, who knows, they might just play a role 40 hours down the line. Needless to say, that's a big part of why I love it. Now, with that being said, I'm not entirely sure yet whether or not this is going to become a full completionist series. If you want to experience everything the game has to offer, it's going to be a long journey, so for this video we'll just jump in as if this was a first episode, and who knows, maybe I'll make a second one sooner or later. To cut down on the length of the video, I will also edit things a bit more than you might be used to, but don't worry, conversations and cutscenes will of course be featured in full length, but exploration, collecting items and inventory management, that sort of thing will be a bit more focused, if you will. It's a bit hard to explain, so it's best you just go ahead and watch the video, you'll see what I mean. And don't worry, the completionist promise is still very much alive, as we set things up for a completionist playthrough that aims to unlock all available achievements, at least those that are not mutually exclusive. The game does unfortunately have a few of those too. For now, allow me two more quick notes before we jump in. First, this game offers a tremendous amount of freedom, and if a game is this open and gives players a ton of liberty, it is almost unavoidable that certain mechanics can be abused. I promise I will try my best not to do that, but I might mention some possibilities here and there. Of course, everyone's definition of when something becomes an exploit differs, but I hope that we can strike a good balance between playing the game as intended and using its mechanics in creative ways that don't feel like cheating. Secondly, Baldur's Gate 3 is, as the name implies, the third game in the series, so you might be thinking, why not start at the beginning? Well, the first two games came out in 1998 and 2000, and even though there are enhanced editions available for both of them, and even though that is the generation of games that I grew up on, they still feel very old school at times, and I just can't really get into them anymore these days. Also, for the most part, the story of Baldur's Gate 3 is very much self-contained, taking place more than 120 years after the events of Baldur's Gate 2. The third game absolutely stands on its own. I just wanted to briefly mention that yes, the two previous games exist, and no, you're not missing out on anything by just playing, or watching in this case, the third one. And with that being said, let's get to it. We will of course play on Honor Mode, which essentially takes Tactician difficulty, the hardest difficulty in the game, and kicks it up a notch, most notably by activating permadeath, so if we die, the game is over. I have also turned off the karmic dice roll setting, as this basically adjusts the luck of the dice rolls so that it succeeds a little bit more often, and while this does apply to our characters as well as to enemy NPCs, we will generally be rolling a bit more frequently, and I want to keep things completely unadjusted. The dice will fall as they do, and we will have to live with the consequences. And with that, I think I have talked enough for the moment, so let's jump in to Baldur's Gate 3. Alright, time to build our character, and let me preface this by saying that we won't be going into the nitty-gritty details of every single race, subrace and class. There is just too much to cover here, and if you're interested in learning about something in particular, chances are you'll find a few good videos explaining it all. Still, the character creation process is pretty deep, so it might take a few moments. I'll leave some timestamps in the description just in case you'd rather jump straight ahead to the gameplay. Now, first of all, the game wants us to select an origin. The default here is the custom origin, a fully customizable character, but there are also 7 already pre-made origin characters available. 6 of these are companions that we will meet over the course of the series, so while we could play our main character as one of them, we would miss out on the interactions with them as companions, so we're not going to do that. Instead, we are going to select the Dark Urge background, which is also fully customizable, but comes with a unique backstory that the default custom origin lacks. Depending on the kind of character you want to play, it might not always be suitable, but I personally feel that the completionist approach demands that we experience it. It simply makes the game's story even richer, and it gives your own character a complexity that is otherwise just not there, unless you force it to be there yourself through roleplaying. And what exactly the Dark Urge actually is, well, luckily I don't have to explain that myself.
My rancid blood whispers to me, kill, kill, and kill again. My ruined body yearns to reap death in this world, and when this foul urge calls, it possesses my whole being. Injured beyond repair, I know nothing besides this. I must resist the dark urge, lest it consume my mind. I must discover who I was and what happened to me before my twitching knife hand writes a tragedy in blood.
And yes indeed, while the Dark Urge is very often used as the basis for a purely, or at least mostly, evil playthrough, I feel like the desire to resist the urge is actually the core element of this background. I've actually read multiple times now that playing as the Dark Urge and trying to resist it does in many ways feel like the way the game was meant to be played. In any case, this character just gives us a lot to work with right from the beginning, and that's exactly what you want in a great role-playing game. Now, the game wants us to pick our race next, and while in actual D&D it is usually a good idea to choose a class first and then pick a race that complements it, in Baldur's Gate the race choice matters significantly less. Still, it does matter to some extent, and so while the Dragonborn here looks absolutely fantastic and might just be my favorite race in the game from a purely visual standpoint, we are instead going with the Halfling. Now, why the Halfling? Well, first of all, there are 5 races that are not featured as part of the major NPC companions in the game, and I wanted to play as one of them, just to be able to show off as much as possible. The Halfling is one of them, and according to the developers, it is actually one of the least popular races for player characters, and thus lends itself nicely to the completionist approach, because even if you have already played the game, chances are you didn't do it with a Halfling. Now, overall, Halflings might be considered a comparatively weak race. As a small creature, Halflings can only move 25 feet, or 7.5 meters per turn, while most other races can move 30 feet, or 9 meters. To make up for that, Halflings get the Lucky trait, which in this game is extremely powerful, much more so than in regular D&D. The reason for that, in this game, rolling a 1 results in an automatic fail of whatever you attempted to do. In D&D, this is also true, but only for attack rolls. In Baldur's Gate, you can also auto-fail skill checks and saving throws with a 1, so an ability that lets us re-roll them is vastly more useful. Believe me, there will be situations where we really don't want to fail, if only for the sake of unlocking one of the 53 achievements in the game, so this trait and therefore the Halfling race are very well suited for a completionist playthrough. With the Brave race feature, we also get advantage on saving throws against being frightened, which is circumstantially useful, but definitely not a top-tier ability. Now, for sub-race, we can then choose between Lightfoot and Strongheart Halfling. Both of them only give us one additional race feature, so this is not necessarily a defining choice. The Lightfoot Halfling receives advantage on stealth checks, the Strongheart Halfling is resilient against any sort of poison damage, and while poison as a damage type does come up somewhat frequently, we are still going with the stealth advantage instead. It might not come into play right away, but eventually we might just find a good use for it. Finally then, we need to select our class, and this is probably the single most important choice that dictates how you will play this game. Once again, my approach here is to pick a class that is not covered by any of the game's main companions, which only leaves us with 3 of them. Sorcerer here is one of those, and actually quite suitable for the main character, as it is a charisma-based class, and charisma is the ability that influences how well we deal with people, which is generally what a video game protagonist in an RPG does, of course outside of fighting them. Still, there is one class that might lend itself even better to that role of the face of the party. You probably know which one I'm talking about. Yes, the Bard. With proficiency in all of the good dialogue skills and a few spells that make social encounters even easier on top of that, Bards are the go-to choice for the party's face. In addition, Bards are also one of the most versatile classes in the game, thus lending themselves extremely well to a completionist playthrough that aims to show off as many of the game's features as possible. And while I am very much aware that both Bard and Sorcerer are among the most popular classes in Baldur's Gate 3, so you may have seen other people use them or use them yourself, there is one more reason to pick Bard here, a unique achievement that can only be obtained with a Bard. Admittedly, you don't need to start as one, but it does make things easier. More on that as we progress. Up next then, we need to select some cantrips and spells, as the Bard is a spellcasting class, at least to some extent. Once again, I won't cover all the pros and cons of all available choices here. For cantrips, less powerful spells that we can always cast, we are simply going with Vicious Mockery, a staple of the Bard class and a very handy debuff spell, and we're also selecting Mage Hand, a cantrip that allows us to do all sorts of nifty shenanigans. For spells, we can select 4 out of 13, and we are diverting again from the defaults with number 1, Fairy Fire. This is a good area of effect debuff spell, giving advantage to our attacks against multiple creatures for up to 10 turns, something that will hopefully be immensely useful right away in the tutorial mission. Spell number 2 then is Longstrider, a ritual spell, meaning that it can be cast for free without consuming a spell slot. Longstrider gives us extra movement range, which is particularly useful considering that we're playing a halfling, and that tactically maneuvering the battlefield can be a deciding factor in winning and losing fights. Spell number 3 will be Speak with Animals, because who's saying that our social encounters only extend to humanoids? With this spell, which is once again a ritual spell, we can also talk to animals. It won't come up all that often, but they are among the most entertaining conversations you can have, and for the sake of full completion, I think we should show them off too. And last but not least, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, a very useful spell to lock down powerful single targets, making them fall prone and thus giving us huge bonuses to our attacks against them. On top of that, it also deals some damage of its own, and it is one of those spells that I feel a bard just has to take. So, not a lot of combat spells, at least not in the directly damaging sense, but these will all prove useful very soon. Also, don't worry, we are not locked into any of these forever. Whenever we level up, we can make changes to this list, and we most likely will. The choice of starting instrument is then entirely cosmetic, but for a small character like the halfling, I think it has to be something small too, so let's pick the violin. Also, the short melody you just heard sounds a bit more dissonant, a bit more disharmonious if you will, which I think suits the inner conflict of the Dark Urge just fine. Speaking of the Dark Urge, with this origin we are also locked into the Haunted One background, giving us bonuses to the medicine and intimidation skills. The former perhaps not as useful for the Bard class, but the latter definitely fits well for someone who will spend a lot of time talking and negotiating. We will be able to select 3 more proficiencies in just a second, but first, and actually almost last, our abilities. 6 scores here determine how good or bad we are at certain things, and while a bard is certainly more of a jack of all trades, it's a good idea to specialize. So, starting with strength, we will have this one as our dump stat, with a score of only 8. It's good for powerful fighters and those who need to carry lots of stuff, but as a small bard halfling, that is just not us, at least not that second part. The power, or rather the accuracy of our attacks, meanwhile stems from a dexterity score of 16, which is going to be very useful for ranged attacks, as well as for a few select melee weapons that we will then obviously focus on. A constitution score of 14 gives us a few extra hit points, which is never a bad thing, but it also allows us to better maintain concentrations on a few useful spells. Intelligence and wisdom are then once again only average, with scores of 10 each. Both are beneficial for quite a few skills, but we have to make sacrifices somewhere, because we still need to put 16 points into Charisma, the Bard's main ability, determining the success of our spellcasting as well as our luck in social situations, of which we will encounter plenty. That is also why our 3 remaining skill proficiencies will all go towards charisma-based skills. With deception, performance and persuasion we are covering pretty much all of our bases, so we should hopefully be able to talk our way out of or into pretty much anything. And with that, all that is left to do is to modify the visual look of our character, and well, I have come up with this. We are playing a female. After 3 series of male Commander Shepard, I just needed a change, and as you can see, she's got a bit of a visual edge to her, with a long scar running across the side of her face, leaving one of her eyes completely black. Nothing too drastic, but enough to give up a slightly dangerous vibe, which I think perfectly fits the Dark Urge background. Finally then, we need to give our character a name, and for this we are turning to the list of my Patreon supporters in the naming rights tier and above. Since this name will accompany us for the rest of whatever this first video eventually turns into, I think it's only fair to give 2 patrons naming rights here. So for the first name we are going with Sylvia, after patron Sylvia Pellicor, and for the last name we are going with Harryfoot, after patron Bubba Harryfoot. So, here she is, Sylvia Harryfoot, ready for her grand adventure.
You need a guardian. Choose one.
Clicking on Proceed, however, does not immediately get us started. Instead, we now need to pick a guardian. Who this is and what their role is, that is still very much a secret. All in all, though, this is a purely cosmetic choice, so nothing we need to dwell on for too long. And, well, since we're playing Halfling, let's make our Guardian a Halfling too, but this one will be male. The default model here already gives off a nice air of aged wisdom, which I think is something a Guardian should embody. So, no need for any further customization. At this point, it is finally time to begin. Let us now actually play some Baldur's Gate 3.
blood in your head thrums and pounds. That pounding blood obscures who you are. An overwhelming loss of memory. How you ended up amidst these hellish flames is just as hidden. You have nothing in your skull, besides your name and a headache. But you are in danger.
Alright, here we are, on board of a crashing ship with our first, well, dialogue option. This one just setting the tone, and we are going with option number 3. It is indeed time for a fresh start for Sylvia Harryford. Let's see where this story eventually leads us.
Time to get out of here. And then you can shed light on the dark of the matter of yourself.
My head.
And there we go, this is what our user interface now looks like. We have a minimap in the top right corner and our spells and abilities on the bottom of the screen. Right next to Sylvia's portrait on the left, you can also see that we are currently equipped with fists and a crossbow, so it might be a good idea to pick up a melee weapon as soon as we can find one. Much more important than that, however, is our main quest to escape the Nautiloid, the ship that we are currently on. So I would say let's get moving and start exploring the room that we woke up in. Perhaps we can find other survivors in these pods next to ours.
Someone else got out. Might be other survivors.
And with that not being the case, let us now investigate the nursery.
This is the pool that thing came from. The parasite now writhing behind your eye.
Right, and before we blindly reach toward the pool, let us perform our first skill check, which means we are now going to roll the dice for the very first time. Okay, so we roll the d20, a 20-sided die, and we need to reach a score of at least 10, because investigation is governed by intelligence and we have a flat 10 in that. We also get no bonuses, so we are entirely dependent on the luck of the roll. And that's a 7, which means we fail the skill check and learn no additional information about this nursery.
You notice nothing more than meets the eye.
And so, all that we can do at this point is to just reach out and see what happens. Alternatively, we could just leave, but that would hardly be the completionist way. And entirely unexpectedly, the pool explodes and we take 4 points of damage, which at this point is about half of our hit points.
I wonder if the gods are watching me.
Now don't worry, we will be able to get back to full health shortly. Before we do though, let's loot the Mind Flayer corpse on the ground here. Now we find only a gemstone.
Dead. Good. Let's see.
And at this point, let us use the restoration thingy over here.
I feel better.
And yes indeed, we have just recovered the entirety of our missing hit points. Unfortunately though, we can only use this once.
What's in here?
And while it looks like we could now leave the room, let's actually not do that just yet. As you can see, we have a chest with some gold in it on one side of the room, and as we head up on the other side, we can help ourselves to another gemstone and also read a rune slate.
Visions project into your mind. A Nautiloid hurtling through the plains, resplendent with psionic energy.
A bit further down, we find some more gold in a second chest, and with that, the room is now thoroughly looted, and we can exit through the sphincter. Shortly after making our way into the next room, we are then greeted by a dead goblin. From the body, we can once again recover some gold, and we also have a number of illicit records in the room that we should examine.
Images of goblins, their habits and histories flash into your mind. A schematic of a Nautiloid flashes into your mind. Nerves, sinews, as much living being as ship. A feeling penetrates your mind. An anomaly, one like ourselves, unconnected from the whole. Caution. Worlds beyond worlds flash before your eyes. Empires of a grand design traversed by ships just like this. 1,000 years of humanoid history, elves, dwarves, humans, and more flash behind your eyes.
Right, and with all of these examined, we can now continue. There is no loot in the room, but a curious-looking neural apparatus in the middle. There is also a person sitting up top, and you may have heard a voice in the background a few moments ago. Yes, that is the voice I'm talking about, but we're actually going to leave it be for the moment. Instead, let's venture forth and see what we can find.
What now?
skin tingles. Visions rush past. A dragon's wing, a silver sword, and a flash of your face seen through the strange woman's eyes.
Oh. My head. What is this? Skvar. You are no thrall. Vlaakith blesses me this day. Together, we might survive.
Looks like we have found the first person who is not dead, and let's ask her about this thrall business. After all, it sounds like she knows a little bit more about what exactly is going on here.
We carry mind flayer parasites. Unless we escape, unless we are cleansed, our bodies and minds will be tainted and twisted. Within days, we will be Geich, mind flayers.
Now, in case you're wondering, a Mind Flayer is the creature we saw in the opening cinematic. Needless to say, turning into one is something we might want to avoid, and it sounds to me like she might know how to do so.
We can do nothing until we escape. That must be our priority. First, we exterminate the imps. Then we find the Helm and take control of the ship. We will address the matter of a cure for this infection once we reach the material plane.
Alright, with Lae'zel now in our party, we have entered combat for the first time. Combat is turn-based, you can see the initiative order at the top of the screen, although if we have party members grouped together, like in this case, we can freely choose who goes first. You may have also just noticed by hovering over her portrait, Lae'zel is a fighter.
I am fury. I am death.
And to get us started here, she's using a two-handed longsword. That means we have one ranged and one melee fighter, so let's get to it. Using Sylvia's crossbow, we are now going to take a shot at one of the imps, and because they are pretty weak, we have a 95% chance to hit. That connects, although unfortunately we only deal 6 points of damage, so we need one more point to kill the imp. Now, shooting the imp also just cost us our action, we only have one per round, but we can still move or use our bonus action. However, in this fight that won't be necessary, so let's just melee attack the next imp with Lae'zel. And that's good enough for our first kill of the video. We earn 10 experience points for it and can now end our turn, which then brings us to the imps. And like I said, the imps are pretty weak and therefore miss both of their attacks. And with that, we are now in a perfect position to unlock the very first achievement of the video, as the imp in front of Sylvia just has a single hit point left, and conveniently enough, hitting it with her bare fist will deal 1 point of damage. So let's see if we can hit that. The chance is 75%, and if we do, that would be achievement number 1 of 53. Alright, lovely, that is the Fists of Fury achievement unlocked, and we can now jump back to Lae'zel to hopefully kill the last imp. Sadly though, once again the enemy is left standing with a single hit point. This time, however, we will use a bonus action. You need to have specific abilities for this, and Lae'zel does with Pommel Strike. However, this is a non-lethal attack, meaning even if it hits, it won't kill the imp.
You proved surprisingly adequate in battle. Now, to the Helm.
And there we go. 3 imps are down on the ground, however, only 2 of them are dead.
May the gods take you first.
However, another swift punch by Miss Harryfoot here makes it 3 out of 3. Now at this point, let's take a closer look at who we are dealing with. We already know that Lae'zel is a fighter, and as such she is definitely leaning more towards an in-your-face combat style, strong and resilient and with the great weapon fighting feature, and with a +5 bonus to all attacks made with her sword. In terms of skills, she also very much embodies the fighter with athletics, acrobatics, survival and intimidation. And while I think that's all we need to know about her at the moment, let's have a brief chat now that combat is over.
Not now. We must go to the Helm.
And yes indeed, 2 very good questions here. If it weren't for the game telling us, we wouldn't even know her name. And why exactly do we need to go towards the ship's helm?
Who am I? Your only chance of survival. Now move. You are wasting time. Control over the ship, or do you wish to die here?
Well, we very much do not, so I suppose to the helm it is, but first let's do some looting.
Let's have a look.
Alright, and this right here, probably one of the luckiest finds you can have in this tutorial mission. The loot on this dead mind flayer is always a bit randomized, but there is a chance that you find this potion of speed, and if you do, it makes the second achievement that we are going for here today a lot more obtainable. At this point then, we can continue and be thorough and loot the rest of the room. I don't think I need to show you all of that, however. It is important though that we grab everything.
Indolence breeds madness.
Now at this point I want to show you a secondary use of the restoration apparatus over here, because as you can see, Lae'zel can no longer use her pommel strike, as it can only be used once per short rest. However, now it can be used again, so the restoration here essentially gives us all the benefits of a rest, something to keep in mind for later.
Ship won't be able to take another dragon attack. We need to get out before it's too late.
Now at this point we are just about done with the looting, only one more body remains and this one only has some gold on it, which means it is now time to sort through what we just acquired. Everything we collect always goes into the inventory of the person picking it up, and in search of a melee weapon for Sylvia we have come across several options, including a rapier, which as you can see deals the highest amount of damage of all the options we have, so let's give her that. For her ranged weapon, meanwhile, we will stick with the hand crossbow. It doesn't do quite as much damage as the light crossbows we have just picked up, but there is a reason we want to stick with it. In the meantime, Lae'zel can very much go for the light crossbow, simply because the damage output is potentially 2 points higher than that of her short bow. And with that, we can now climb up the ethereal mesh over here and proceed through another sphincter into the next area.
Let's see what this does.
As we enter, we immediately notice another restoration apparatus on the right. We also have 2 sacrificed cultists in the middle of the room, and what looks to be a console with some sigils right in front of us.
Gauge machinery. I can make no sense of it.
Can't read the script. Unleash.
Now, each time we interacted with a sigil here, it prompted us to do an Arcana check. However, at least with Sylvia, we failed 2 of 3. Now, the Arcana skill is governed by intelligence, and Lae'zel has the Astral Knowledge ability, allowing her to gain proficiency on all intelligence checks, even if she normally does not.
Cannot make this out. Arcane sigil. What might it mean?
Now, unfortunately, even with the bonus, she doesn't make any more sense of the sigils than Sylvia, in which case we should probably turn our attention to the Mind Flayer part now, in which we have someone who is apparently still very much alive.
You! Get me out of this taxi! We have no time for stragglers.
Now, before we promise or refuse to get whoever's inside out of there, let's take a look around. Even though Lae'zel urges us to press onwards, nothing will be lost if we just spend a few more moments here trying to rescue another poor soul.
The construction is too alien. Nothing looks familiar.
This ship is crashing. Do you intend to die for a stranger?
Alright, so will we or won't we? Well, of course we will. Our journey towards the Helm will most likely not be a walk in the park, and so we'll take all the help we can get.
Try that contraption next to the pod. They did something to it when they sealed me in. Hurry! Please!
Alright, contraption right next to the pod. I think we can do that. Let's see if we find an opening mechanism.
The console appears dormant.
And, well, let's not start bashing things right away. Perhaps there is a switch.
The mechanisms are completely unrecognizable at first, but then you spy an empty socket.
Right, an empty socket, but we don't have anything to put into it, so let's attempt option B, brute force it. Who knows, maybe we get lucky.
Nothing. The console remains dormant.
Whatever fits in that socket must power this thing.
So, seems to me like we know roughly what we're looking for. Let's take a look around and see if we can't find anything to activate that console.
Faint images appear in your mind. A brain, a Githyanki warrior, and centuries of darkness.
Now, on the table over here we also find a dark mind, and it is very important that we take it. It will play a role later.
A brain in a jar.
After picking up a necklace, we can also locate a locked chest.
Leave the key.
And with neither key nor pod opener anywhere in the vicinity, let's keep looking. Maybe the next room here has the answers. You may have also just noticed a small creature scuttling about. We'll take care of that in just a moment, but first let's do some looting, and on the corpse here we find a golden key, so at least getting into that chest should no longer be a problem.
How many hosts of these gay infected.
Better not be cursed.
Dazed woman is trapped inside the pod. She doesn't notice you.
And unfortunately, it does not look like we have any way of freeing her. So let's head deeper into the room, loot a chest for 2 healing potions, and also pick up the slave mind.
Another brain.
And then we can find what we are looking for on the body of the dead thrall.
This might unlock those controls next to the pod.
Now, before we head back to free the captive, maybe there is a way to free the one in this room too.
Can mean anything.
And after Sylvia fails the Arcana check, let's try again with Lae'zel.
Perfect.
And well, that could mean anything. One thing is for sure, if we don't do anything, our prisoner is certainly not getting any better. So I suppose we might as well go and see what this does.
As you place your hand on the pod, you hear something. A presence connected to the pod, commanding the person inside to change.
Foul Gaith, transformed by a lever. That must never be our fate.
The newborn mind flayer stares at you, weak and dazed.
Right, so I guess that one's on us. And while we are in a killing mood, we might as well also now fire at the little creature roaming around. Right, so into another combat encounter we go. Our enemy this time, an Intellect Devourer, basically a little brain on legs. After our shot, now down to 13 hit points and up next in the initiative order. So let's run away, which will then force it to burn its entire turn on movement. So, a dash brings it into melee range with Lae'zel, but that cost its action, which means Lae'zel herself can now go in with the longsword. 8 points of damage, that's lovely, and we are also going to follow it up with another pommel strike again. After all, we can use restoration at least once more. And after the critical hit and with only 1 hit point left, let's go for the killing blow with Sylvia. Right, and there we go, 10 more experience points that are actually a bit tricky to earn. I'll explain why in a moment, but for now I think we can head back to the console in the previous room.
The console appears dormant.
And let us now insert that Eldritch rune we found, and let's hope that we do not just produce another Mind Flayer.
The console hums to life. But what is its purpose? Will it free the captive, or transform her like that other unfortunate?
And here's the reason why we're doing this with Lae'zel. She gets a +2 bonus to her Arcana checks. We can, however, improve the odds even further by activating Sylvia's Bardic Inspiration, allowing Lae'zel to add an extra d6 to her roll. And it's a good thing we do, because rolling a 6, the +2 bonus from the Arcana proficiency does not cut it. Thankfully though, the Bardic Inspiration allows us to just meet the DC.
The pulsing glow and organic lines of the device make it seem more like a beating heart than a machine. This device is different from the one that caused the other captive to transform. Perhaps it will open the nearby pod.
Now obviously we did not go through all that trouble just to learn what the console does, but now that we know for sure, I think we can safely activate it.
Suddenly, you feel a hideous squirming in your head. A parasite. Then discomfort fades, and another sensation washes over you. Connection. Authority.
Now, in order to get the pod to open, we need to roll a wisdom check, and Lae'zel gets a +1 bonus to these. But apart from a natural 1, the success here would be guaranteed either way with a DC of only 2. Let's see if Lae'zel can hit that target.
You feel the biomechanical brain of the console process your command and yield to it. A shiver runs across your mind. You feel sated.
At last. Thought I was done for.
Right, looks like our party might just be about to gain another member. Let's have a brief chat and learn what Shadowheart here is all about.
thought that damn thing was going to be my coffin. Thank you.
Your mind lurches into her thoughts. Her gratitude is mixed with wariness, because you have a gift with you.
You keep dangerous company.
So, she does not look to be particularly keen on Lae'zel, who is indeed a Githyanki, although in our situation I would very much say that beggars can't be choosers, and Lae'zel has more than held her own in combat.
Fair point. Looks like there's plenty of fighting ahead. Let me come with you. We can get off this ship and watch each other's backs along the way.
Now, before we agree to that, let us briefly ask her about that connection we just made. After all, she seems to be a bit more talkative than our other companion.
I did. It must be because of those parasites they put in us. But that'll have to wait. Are we going to help each other or not?
And of course we will. We actually need her very much for what comes next. But let's not skip over the proper introductions. It would be nice to learn at least one of our companions' names.
Shadowheart. One moment.
Okay, so Shadowheart grabbing something from her pod, and obviously we're going to ask about that.
It's nothing. Trust me.
Enough of this chatter. We need to get to the Helm. Now.
She's right. Lead on.
Right, and with that our party now grows to 3, we earn some experience points, and we have now acquired Shadowheart, the cleric, a spellcaster focused mostly on buffs and debuff spells, and with a shield also somewhat resilient to enemy attacks. There is obviously a bit more to it, but I don't think we need to get into the nitty-gritty details at this point. Suffice it to say that Shadowheart will not be our primary damage dealer. Instead, she will hopefully ensure that the rest of our squad performs to the best of their abilities. And once again, even though we just talked to her, we can have another brief conversation. And for the sake of true completion, let's do that before we venture forth.
Something the matter? Besides the obvious, that is.
And, well, it might not be the most polite dialogue option, but Shadowheart is a curious name indeed, so what's up with that?
Pondering my name won't get us off this ship. Let's stow the small talk until we're safe, shall we?
And maybe she has another idea how to do that, aside from taking control of the Helm.
Well, jumping overboard is hardly an option. So that leaves us with taking control of this ship. Provided we can figure out how to do that, of course.
Alright, with that, let's get to it. We can at this point quickly loot a backpack right next to Shadowheart's pod. Chances are it belonged to her in the first place or to one of the sacrificed cultists in the room. And we also want to pick up this glowing Nautiloid tank over here, before we then head back to the console near the room's entrance.
What's this gibberish? Annihilate.
Okay, so at least we now have learned 2 of the 3 options here, Annihilate on the right and Unleash on the left. Annihilate does not strike me as the one that we should go with, and the unknown option in the middle could be risky too.
Psionic energy radiates from the prisoners, but they do not react.
Right, so Unleash did not do anything, and Annihilate still strikes me as a very bad choice, and that leaves us with the unknown option in the middle, so I guess we'll have to learn what it does the hard way. And yes indeed, we are fighting 2 sacrificed cultists. By pressing the T key we can learn a little bit more about them. Essentially they are average humans with 10s across the board, however most likely already under Mind Flayer control. So let's begin by shooting the one in the back. 9 points of damage from Sylvia get us off to a good start, and with her movement we can then get her close to the other target and use her Flourish bonus action to strike that one too. Unfortunately that misses, which brings us to Lae'zel, who can simply hack away. And unfortunately we did just use her pommel strike in the fight earlier, so we can't use it again until we take a short rest or use the restoration apparatus. Which now brings us to Shadowheart, who will use one of her damaging spells. Casting Inflict Wounds will burn one of her just 2 spell slots at level 1, and she also needs to get into melee range with her target to cast it, which as you can see is only possible against the cultist closest to us, but if the attack hits it will deal up to 30 points of damage, not that we would need it. Right, that is the second 80% miss of the fight, lovely, which means that both of our enemies now get to attack. Alright, the guy in the back, unfortunately a spellcaster too, now casting Acid Splash to deal some damage to both Shadowheart as well as to Sylvia. Still, we should be able to finish the fight now, unless Lae'zel misses an 80% too. Beautiful, that's one of the cultists down, 10 XP for everyone. Let's have Miss Harryfoot take care of the other one. And there we go, 20 experience points from this fight, XP that we would not have gotten had we just picked the Annihilate option from the console earlier. So it's very important that you fight these guys, even if it might cost you a few hit points here and there. Luckily though, we have not yet touched the restoration tentacles in the room, so let's do that now. And for this one, I would also like you to keep an eye on Shadowheart's spell slots. If she runs out of these, she can no longer cast spells, so we will be very pleased to discover that restoration also replenishes them, meaning that it not only functions as a short rest, but in fact as a long rest, something that we want to keep in mind as we get closer to the Helm. Before we keep going, however, let us first unlock that chest we located earlier. This gives us another gemstone and 17 gold, and at this point we actually want to retrace our steps all the way back to one of the very first areas we visited. You might remember this one here with the neural apparatus in it, where we were able to hear that strange voice. So that voice seemingly coming from the person located up here, who doesn't really look to be in the most vital of states. However, to interact with them, we want to switch over to Lae'zel, just to improve our chances a tiny little bit.
We are here. Here.
You've come to save us from this place. From this place you'll free us.
You realize you're talking to an Intellect Devourer, a minion of the Mind Flayers who abducted you.
Please. Before they return! They return.
Right, so despite failing the perception check, we recognized this as an Intellect Devourer because we fought one earlier, and even though Lae'zel has a race-specific option to interact with it here, we're not going to choose that. Instead, let's simply make some conversation.
The enemy! So many enemies!
And indeed, at this point we should probably also learn what is asked of us.
Remove us from this body! From this case. Free us.
Okay, so we have a few options here on how to achieve that, and very importantly, we want to use the investigation option first, because if we succeed at this, it will present us with a third, much easier path, and this is one of those situations where we really do not want to fail. That is also why we are now activating both Bardic Inspiration as well as Guidance, a cantrip from Shadowheart, allowing Lae'zel to add another d4 to her roll, which is the reason why we're doing this with her, so that she can benefit from both of those bonuses. So let's see if that's enough to meet the DC of 10, but as far as I'm aware, you can't really get much better odds than this. Well, good thing we pumped in all of those bonuses, I guess. Otherwise, a 4 on the roll here definitely would not have cut it.
You notice edema, a swelling of the brain causing pressure where it strains against the shell of the skull.
And here you can see it, next to the strength and dexterity options, we now have a medicine option unlocked too, and we actually have advantage on this one, which means we can roll twice and pick the highest result. Needless to say, that is the option that we're going with. You can see it here, we now have 2 dice, which will both be rolled to hopefully meet the DC of 10, but once again we will try not to leave anything up to chance, so let's pump in another Bardic Inspiration, and with all of these bonuses we will then hopefully succeed. Right, and this is why you never rely on the dice roll. A 3 and a 1 even with advantage. Luckily we are saved by that last charge of Bardic Inspiration, so let's see if the cerebral extraction succeeds.
The brain lifts from the skull, but you notice an opportunity. You could cripple the strange creature, making it more subservient, should it prove a threat.
Now, as tempting as it might be, it is very important that we do not do this. The benefits we would get from this are actually no longer relevant to us. The downsides, however, would be huge, especially considering that we could fail this check, so let's just leave the Intellect Devourer as it is.
We are free. Our freedom is ours, friend!
The creature pauses, listening. Something behind your eyes seizes in recognition.
We must go to the Helm! At the Helm, we are needed.
Right, seems like Lae'zel is not the only one wanting to go to the Helm, but maybe the Intellect Devourer can tell us a bit more about what awaits us there.
The brain tenses, as though querying an unseen advisor.
Do you not hear it? We will not survive here. We are needed to navigate. We are needed to leave this realm.
Okay, so looks like the Helm is indeed where we need to go to get out of here. We do, however, want to keep in mind that whole unseen advisor thing. Might be that we're not the only ones making our way over there. Either way, at this point, let's ask if the Intellect Devourer has a name. After all, it does seem friendly enough.
Us. We are us.
Okay, so Sylvia, Lae'zel, Shadowheart and us. Quite the party of adventurers we have gathered. Although, considering that us seems to be very much at home on this ship, it might be risky to bring it along. Who's to say that we can trust it? So perhaps it would be best to part ways at this point.
Do nothing for me. Do everything for us.
Alright, so it looks like us desperately wants to come with us, and obviously we did not go through all of this trouble just to leave it behind, so let's have it join our party and keep going, where else but to the Helm.
To the Helm we go! We are going to the Helm.
Alright, and here we have it, us, the Intellect Devourer, now a temporary companion. With 17 hit points, already the sturdiest of our party members. Ability-wise, however, it can't do much, just move and melee attack. What we can also see here is that us is currently under the newborn condition. In a few seconds, however, that will wear off, and it's a good idea to wait until that happens, as this condition lowers its hit points and its armor class, the latter dictating how easy it is to hit a target, and for what comes next, we want us to be as strong as possible. And so here we are now, our Intellect Devourer companion now with 27 hit points and an armor class raised from 7 to 11. Once again though, as you can see, not with a whole lot of abilities to choose from. Still, it will be very useful to have around for the rest of the video. And as usual, before we head out, let's have another brief chat with us, this time initiated by Miss Harryfoot.
The creature reaches into your mind, its thoughts rattling against yours. Something inside you squirms in recognition.
Friend, we will go to the Helm now.
And of everyone we have encountered so far, us seems to know the most about our situation. So let's ask why we're here, what was put into our eye, and where we are.
To know you. To love you. To give you our gift. A gift. A gift to make you as we are. Soon you will be so beautiful. So powerful. In a realm where we have fled. We have fled to a realm called Avernus, first of the 9 hells. We are escaping a great evil.
And there we go, that confirms it. We are indeed sooner or later going to turn into a mind flayer, it seems. For the moment though, it seems like escaping the 9 hells should be our priority.
We are going to the Helm! My friend and I are going to the Helm.
Now, at this point, it's time to retrace our steps once more and head back into the room where we freed Shadowheart. This time we are taking the southern sphincter exit, which brings us into a small chamber featuring another restoration device, as well as a curious cerebral aquarium.
Mind flayer horticulture.
We are nearing the Helm. Once inside, do as I say.
Who put you in charge? I'll trust my own judgment.
Yank.
Okay, so I think it's quite clear at this point that we are about to reach the Helm, and that upon reaching it we will not be able to escape that easily. Jumping into the map here also shows us that our quest location is right in front of us, and well, considering that the few fights we've had so far were all but challenging, I don't really consider it much of a spoiler if I say that something slightly more tricky is coming up. So let's prepare accordingly, and first things first, we can see that Shadowheart does not have a ranged weapon, so let's change that by giving her a light crossbow for maximum damage. Since she is a cleric, we can also freely switch around the spells she can use. At the moment you can see she's got access to 4 of them: Guiding Bolt, Inflict Wounds, Shield of Faith and Healing Word. And in preparation here we want to get rid of Inflict Wounds and Shield of Faith, and instead we want to prepare Bless, which lasts for up to 10 turns and gives up to 3 creatures an extra d4 on attack rolls and saving throws. Arguably even more important than that, however, is Command, a spell that allows her to command an enemy to, for example, move closer, flee, or drop their weapon. Moving on then, we jump over to Sylvia, who will now cast Longstrider on the entire party. This will give everyone a movement speed increase by 3 meters, or 10 feet, and since it is a ritual spell, we can use it freely as long as we are not in combat, so we can cast it as many times as we need. It will also last indefinitely until we decide to take a long rest, so in other words, there is really no reason not to have this on at all times. With that taken care of, we now also have one more charge of Bardic Inspiration, and we're going to cast that on Lae'zel, giving her a d6 bonus to her next attack roll, ability check or saving throw. However, that d6 will only be used if she needs it to meet the DC or armor class. Continuing then, we toggle group mode off and move us towards the restoration thingy, and then we will enter turn-based mode. Yes, we can do so even if we are not currently in combat. Entering turn-based mode is very important because we're now going to cast Bless with Shadowheart, and it only lasts for 10 turns, so we want to get the most out of it. The recipients of the extra d4 to attack rolls and saving throws will then be Lae'zel, Shadowheart, and Sylvia. As you can see, us is out of range at the moment, and the other 3 are more important anyway. Now, we are not done just yet. As you can see, the ground in the chamber is partially on fire, and we can now use that to dip Shadowheart's crossbow in it, which will now give it an extra d4 of fire damage whenever it hits an enemy. And we are about to do the same with Sylvia, but first let's cast Mage Hand, a spectral hand that gets to act on its own in combat and also persists for 10 turns, or until it is killed, which, considering that it only has 3 hit points, can happen quite quickly. After taking a few steps forward with Miss Harryfoot, we then also cast Mage Hand with Lae'zel. She can use this not because she's a spellcaster, but because she's a Githyanki, and this is one of her unique race abilities. With her longsword then also dipped in fire, we jump back to us and activate Restoration, which now recovers all of our used spell slots and charges for Bardic Inspiration, while the effects that we cast with those spell slots and Bardic Inspiration charges are very much still active. One final thing that we now want to make sure of is that us rejoins the party and does not lag too far behind, and then we jump back over to Shadowheart, reactivate group mode and proceed to the Helm.
Do it. We will deal with the Geich after we escape.
Connect the nerves. Nerves. We will connect them.
We need to get out of here now.
Right, so here we are at the Helm, and unsurprisingly things are not exactly peaceful. As you can see, we have against us various creatures of the 9 hells, 2 imps, a hellspore, and Commander Zhalk with 195 hit points, and this is the enemy we need to kill if we want to go for full completion. To make things a bit easier, we are, at least for the moment, allied with a Mind Flayer who, as we saw in the cutscene earlier, thinks that we are his thralls, but as we have discovered, we are still very much masters of our own minds. Now, for the time being, the Mind Flayer and Commander Zhalk will battle amongst each other. Commander Zhalk already had his turn and did 16 points of damage with a single hit. Luckily, he missed the second strike, but yes, he can attack twice per round. Speaking of rounds, on the right side of the screen you can see a big 15. That is the number of turns we have until we need to reach the transponder. And that is actually our one and only objective in this fight. There is no need to kill any enemies whatsoever, but obviously in the spirit of true completion we will do our best. And so we begin with Sylvia Harryfoot herself, who first of all will drop the Nautiloid tank that we picked up next to Shadowheart's pod, and after placing it a little bit closer to the entrance we move as far as we can into the room, and thanks to being blessed we now have a guaranteed hit against the imp further in the back here. And here you can also see how important that extra bit of fire damage is, the regular hit only dealing 6 points of damage, the extra fire damage from dipping the weapon granting an additional 2, and as such the imp goes down in a single hit. Up next, it's time to strike the other one with us, and even without being blessed, the Intellect Devourer has a guaranteed hit. And conveniently enough, that deals exactly 7 points of damage, which means we can now use the Intellect Devourer's bonus action to cover a bit more ground. Jumping always allows you to gain an extra few feet per turn, but it does come at the cost of your bonus action. With Lae'zel, we can then target the Hellspore and hopefully make it 3 out of 3. And lovely, with 17 points of damage we completely annihilate the boar, although it did also cost her the Bardic Inspiration to ensure the hit. Now at this point we can quickly loot the boar as well as an Intellect Devourer right next to it, although neither one has anything on them. Using her bonus action, we can now jump deeper into the room. As a Githyanki, she gets extra range on these jumps and can therefore cover a lot more ground than if she was just running regularly. This now gets us in the perfect position to pick up another Nautiloid tank, and thankfully the game allows us to freely transfer items between party members, no matter how far away from each other they actually are. So we are giving the tank to Shadowheart and immediately have her drop it again, and then we can begin looting the bodies over on the left side here. Near the bottom right of the screen you can always see what we picked up. Most of the enemies don't have anything on them, but at least the imps usually carry weapons. And not only do we have lots of carrying capacity still left to spare, we might also not get a chance to loot them later. Now at this point we perform what is probably the most crucial action of the entire fight. We are about to cast Command Drop on Commander Zhalk. And yes, I know there are ways to improve the chances of this succeeding, but if it doesn't, then we can simply try again using Shadowheart's second spell slot. Either way, in my opinion, it is important to hit this as early as possible, otherwise it might just become a whole lot more difficult to kill the commander. Alright, and the roughly 50-50 chance goes in our favor, and as you can see, Commander Zhalk has just dropped the Everburn Blade, a magical two-handed greatsword, and getting this out of his hands and potentially into ours is very, very important. Now, to end our turn, we will use one of Sylvia's 3 Bardic Inspirations on the Mind Flayer, as we are very much still relying on him to take down Zhalk with us. At this point then we can end our turn. So far things have been going extremely well. Let's see if our luck persists for the next few rounds. Okay, so the Mind Flayer just used his Mind Blast ability and Commander Zhalk failed the saving throw. So not only did he take a lovely 29 points of damage, but he's also stunned, so he will not get to act on the next turn, which buys us a bit more time. And I actually misspoke earlier. Technically our turn is not yet over, because as you can see we can still take actions with our 2 mage hands, and we are using the first one here to move the 2 Nautiloid tanks from the left side of the area back to the entrance. In a few rounds we want to have all 4 of them clustered closely together, especially now that we have stripped Commander Zhalk of his weapon, because I think that allows us to try for something even better than taking him out, but we have a few turns left to make a final decision. For now we have 4 Nautiloid tanks in place at the entrance, and so let's end our turn and bring it back to the stunned Commander Zhalk. So, no actions taken by Commander Zhalk, which brings us straight back to us, the party, not the Intellect Devourer. And we begin by jumping up to the 2 dead imps with Sylvia here. Looting them gives us a hand axe and another crossbow. And at this point we are going to cast Fairy Fire to hopefully give all of our attacks against Commander Zhalk advantage for the next 10 turns. You can see though that the success chance is extremely poor at only 40%. Still, we want to give it a try. However, we will place the Fairy Fire in such a way that it does not hit the Mind Flayer. For the moment we are only interested in Zhalk. And what can I say? It looks like Lady Luck is on our side here today. Against the odds, the Fairy Fire succeeds, and that means we will now attack Commander Zhalk with advantage for the next 10 turns. I just want to briefly mention that hitting this is entirely optional. In my opinion, getting him to drop the weapon is far more important, but neither one is actually required to take him out. It just makes the whole affair a whole lot easier. Now, at this point, we're using Lae'zel's action to pick up and equip the Everburn Blade, and because it is a magical weapon, it will be much more useful against Commander Zhalk, because as you can see, he is resistant to slashing damage from non-magical weapons. As a magical weapon, however, the Everburn Blade will deal full damage. Now we have just used Lae'zel's action, which means we can't attack anymore, but we can still use her bonus action to shove Commander Zhalk. That is unsuccessful, however, and so we now proceed with us, who thanks to Fairy Fire now has a 70% hit chance. That connects for 2 points of damage, not a lot, but it adds up. And after looting a short sword from another dead body with Shadowheart, we can move in with her too, and with her we'll take a crossbow shot at 64%. That connects for 4 points of damage in total, and at this point we want to transfer one of the hand axes we looted with Sylvia back to Shadowheart, who can then promptly drop the weapon on the ground. And with that we now end our turn, which then brings us to the Mind Flayer, and after that to our 2 mage hands. And the Mind Flayer's Tentacle Lash melee attack succeeds for a further 14 points of damage, and at this point our mage hands come back into play as more than just neat utilities, because we can actually use them to throw items, including weapons, and weapons like the hand axe are actually designed to be thrown. We just need to make sure that we get the angles right, and then we can aim the axe at Commander Zhalk with a 44% hit chance. Not great, but it is an extra attack that we otherwise would not have. And it also hits for 3 points of damage. Meanwhile, our other mage hand will spend the turn moving those Nautiloid tanks even deeper into the entrance. This is probably the one part of the fight that you could rightfully consider a bit cheesy, but if we truly want to achieve full completion, this should be part of it, especially since the fight against Commander Zhalk is going so well at the moment. Eventually then the tanks are in place and our mage hand can move back towards us, and we can now end our turn and bring it back to the commander. So, without his sword, Commander Zhalk is only capable of punching the Mind Flayer, and even though both strikes connect, they only deal 12 points of damage in total. A single strike with the Everburn Blade, meanwhile, most likely would have done more. Now, at this point, we can start shooting the commander with Sylvia too, and after dealing a further 2 points of damage, she moves back towards the entrance, where she will now move into position right next to that burning patch on the ground. Us, meanwhile, will continue to hack away at the commander, while Lae'zel can carefully move the hand axe closer to her and then pick it up, because who's to say that we can throw it only once. Afterwards, she can then take her first real swing with the Everburn Blade, and immediately she delivers a lovely 11 points of damage. With her bonus action, she can now try to shove Zhalk again, but once more that fails. And so, as we prepare for Shadowheart's turn, let us now transfer that hand axe back over to her, and let's actually give her a second one off of Sylvia too. Both of them will then be dropped, and Shadowheart can continue looting a bit, especially the Mind Flayer corpses usually have some good stuff on them, and after we're done, we just want to move a little bit further towards the transponder.
Hurry, before they strike!
So, moving to this spot has unfortunately triggered some enemy reinforcements, 2 more imps and another hellspore. They always appear once you cross a certain threshold and get too close to the transponder. And taking a closer look at the 2 imps, we can see that one of them is carrying an axe while the other one does not have a weapon, which means that second one is much more likely to cast the ranged fiery bolt attack that we saw earlier in the video, and that ranged attack makes it the more dangerous of the 2 enemies, so that's why we now shoot it. 8 points of damage get us the kill, that is just lovely, and we can do a bit more with Shadowheart here, as we move her a bit closer to the right side to drag a caustic bulb and 2 void bulbs off of the table, which we can then subsequently pocket. And that once again finishes the turn of our 4 characters. With that, we give things back to our Mind Flayer ally.
The way out is through.
Victory awaits.
Once again, probably also thanks to Fairy Fire, the Tentacle Lash succeeds. Commander Zhalk suffers an additional 22 points of damage, and with that he is now fast approaching half health. And let's try to nudge him a bit more towards the right direction with our 2 mage hands. After all, we have 2 hand axes to use and 2 hands to throw them. As you can see though, you can't get lucky all the time, so let's take the slightly better odds of hitting one of the imps with axe number 2, and that does indeed succeed, although it only deals 2 points of damage. And with that, another turn comes to an end. So far, I think we're doing quite well.
If this ship hits the ground, we're dead.
Alright, so again 12 more points of damage against the Mind Flayer. However, at least for the moment he is still in good shape. Now to begin our next turn, we want to move as close as possible to the chamber entrance with Sylvia, and just a little bit further will do the trick. Yeah, I'm not quite sure why, but parts of the area are scripted to go up in flames if you move here, and in just a moment we might just be able to use that to our advantage. For the time being, however, we can simply use the dash action to get back to where we came from, and with our movement range exhausted, it's time to continue wailing on Commander Zhalk. The attack from us unfortunately misses, but Lae'zel connects for 16 points of damage, and as usual we will use her bonus action now and try to shove Commander Zhalk. Right, and this time we finally succeed, which might just allow us to pull off some more nifty shenanigans, as we will now immediately close the gap again with Lae'zel and us. The idea here is that Commander Zhalk is scripted to only go after the Mind Flayer as long as he's alive, and perhaps in an attempt to attack that Mind Flayer it might just move past Lae'zel and us and leave their melee range, in which case the two of them would then get a free attack of opportunity. We'll see if that works out. Chances are actually quite slim, I think, because the Mind Flayer is up next and will most likely close the distance too, but this is honor mode, which means we have to seize every advantage we can get. Speaking of which, now that it's injured, our chances to kill the imp here are vastly improved. Unfortunately though, Shadowheart only deals 3 meager points of damage, and so it will get to act on the next turn. There is no need to worry though, as it is a melee enemy, there is an easy way to avoid getting hit, and that's to just put enough distance between us and it. So after dropping 2 more hand axes and receiving a third one off of another dead imp, Shadowheart will retreat as far as she can go, and at this point we can once again end our turns. Okay, so another Mind Blast succeeds here and once again stuns Commander Zhalk, which actually robs us of any chance to perform attacks of opportunity. Meanwhile, the Hellspawn has to use its action to dash, and so we remain unharmed for yet another turn. Commander Zhalk, meanwhile, is slowly but steadily starting to look rough with only 63 hit points remaining. I will be entirely honest though, I had not expected the fight to go that well. Now at this point we still have our 2 mage hands before it's the imp's go. But for the moment, let's stay focused on the boar and soften it up a bit. Or we could also just kill it with 2 axe throws, that definitely works too. And once again, I think this goes to show just how incredibly useful those 2 mage hands can be. Just like in XCOM, especially on honor mode, it's all about the action economy, and at the moment we have that firmly under our control. As expected then, the imp has to dash and therefore can't attack, but something else is happening. You may have just noticed that 2 cambions have been added to the initiative order, and in a rather unfortunate spot too, splitting our party into 2 groups, as they will have their go right after Sylvia and us, but before Lae'zel and Shadowheart. On the bright side, one of them has already stepped into the fire we created, suffering a bit of burning damage. And yes, of course, as creatures of the 9 hells they are resistant to that, but not completely immune. That is also why we can now dip Sylvia's crossbow into the fire here and then use her action to hide. As you saw, both of those cambions also had over 100 hit points each, so out here and all alone we do not want Sylvia to get caught by them. Intellect Devourer us meanwhile delivers a further 4 points of damage against Commander Zhalk, while Shadowheart continues calmly looting the place in the middle of battle. On the table over on this side we have another caustic bulb that we want to pick up, and at this point we do of course want her to take out the imp, which is now in melee range. However, instead of relying on hitting the 95%er, let us instead grab the high ground. If we just move a few steps up the stairs here, then we get a small bonus to our hit chance, a flat +2 equaling a 10% increase, enough to turn this into a guaranteed hit. And just like that, the reinforcements have been defeated, at least those coming from that side of the ship, and at this point timing is key, because while we want to kill Commander Zhalk quickly, we don't want to do so too quickly, and we also want to make sure that we are the ones landing the killing blow, otherwise the achievement for defeating him will not be unlocked. Now after picking the 2 hand axes back up with Lae'zel, we can once again lay into the commander. And after delivering a further 15 points of damage, we can also quickly loot the bodies of the reinforcements that just attacked us. From the imp here we can loot another hand axe, so we should be able to keep feeding our mage hands for a few more turns. Up next then we will once again try to shove Commander Zhalk, but as you can see it takes a little bit of positioning to get the angles just right. Still, the shove succeeds, and that actually makes things a whole lot easier for us, as we can now safely run away from the commander without risking an opportunity attack. Why do we want to run away? Well, those 2 cambions who arrived as reinforcements will enter the fight shortly, and the 2 of them are a little less fixated on the Mind Flayer as their target, so it might be a good idea not to present ourselves too prominently. Now, before we move, we once again transfer some hand axes over to Shadowheart, who can then promptly drop them, and we will also have her split her stack of healing potions and drop those 2 as well, before we then retreat further towards the transponder with both Lae'zel and us.
Taking position.
Sometimes the only way out is through.
Alright, so another tentacle lash brings Commander Zhalk down to 29 hit points. However, I would like to get him a little bit lower before we go for the killing blow. Otherwise, chances are that we don't succeed in taking him out before the Mind Flayer is up again, who will on average deal 15 points of damage with a tentacle lash, but never more than 24. Still, even with the commander about to go down shortly, we want the Mind Flayer to survive for a little longer, which is why we are now throwing a healing potion at him. Yes, while in regular D&D you need to use an action to actually give someone a potion like this, in this game you can just chuck it at them. Either way, the Mind Flayer now gains back 6 hit points. With Mind Flayer number 2, meanwhile, we will then throw an axe at Commander Zhalk. Keep in mind that he is resistant to the damage, so even if we hit this, which as you can see we don't, he should be able to survive another Mind Flayer attack.
Take this ship, or you will have your head.
Now another turn begins, and we are still waiting for the 2 Cambions to move in. At this point you can probably see what we're going for, and because Sylvia is up first, we'll use the turn here to redip her crossbow, which is actually crucial for what we have planned with her. Since she still has her action, we can also recast her mage hand a little early. We still have a few turns on the first cast, but otherwise the action would go to waste, as we need her to stay put for another turn. Intellect Devourer us then has the simple task of just running away as far as possible, and with that it's time for the Cambions to make their grand entrance. Both of them are so far away from the action that they have to dash, also because they can't see Miss Harryfoot, and while they do, they also move through fire, taking a small amount of damage. Eventually then they come to a halt right next to our Nautiloid tanks, which is the part of the fight that I think might be a bit cheesy, because obviously I knew exactly where they would come from and where they would go. Still, in my opinion, that's what it takes if you truly want to complete this fight, and I think at the moment our odds of doing so are fairly good. Now, with Lae'zel, after picking another hand axe back up, we will jump away as far as possible and take a ranged attack against Zhalk. The 2 points of damage here are still very much within the acceptable range. Following that attack, we can then also give one of her healing potions to Shadowheart, who will promptly use her action to throw it at the Mind Flayer, this time healing him for 7 hit points. Afterwards, we then take a few steps back with both of them and end the turn. Let's see what our tentacle friend can do. Okay, another Mind Blast, and for the 3rd straight time it succeeds, dealing 21 points of damage and stunning the commander yet again. Once again, I guess Lady Luck is on our side in this fight, as that now leaves him with 6 hit points, a perfect amount for us to take him out next turn, after which we will then bank on the Mind Flayer to engage the 2 Cambions, and that's why we are now throwing another healing potion at him. Those Cambions can hit pretty hard.
Throw their corpses in the sticks.
Now, at this point, it's time for the second part of the plan to go into action. Let's use Sylvia's flaming crossbow to shoot the cluster of Nautiloid tanks directly in front of the 2 Cambions. However, we're not going to shoot them using an action. That will instead be used to dash. The shot will then come from her mobile shot bonus action, which is only available if you're using a hand crossbow, not a light crossbow like Lae'zel and Shadowheart. So that's why we took that with her. Let's see what this does.
Fall by my hand.
Alright, so shooting those Nautiloid tanks with anything that burns will cause them to explode. In this case, however, only 3 or 4 actually did, but still, as you can see, the 2 Cambions both took about 35 to 40 points of damage. The exact amount is once again dependent on the dice roll. I have seen numbers even higher than this, but also a bit lower. Either way, this should now make them a bit easier to deal with. Now, at this point, Sylvia has dashed away as far as she can go, not as far as I would have liked, but that's life as a halfling. Us, meanwhile, will simply retreat even further, and then we can end the turn. Cambion number 1 then once again dashes, so we are safe from that one. Number 2, meanwhile, uses the fly action, so we've got an attack incoming. And the firebolt hits Sylvia for 8 points of damage. It could have dealt up to 10, but that's a risk we had to take. Upon taking damage, she also needs to roll a Constitution saving throw to maintain concentration on her fairy fire, although at this point losing that would hardly be a problem. Luckily, we don't have to worry about that, so let's unleash on the commander now. We have 3 possible attacks here, starting with another crossbow shot from Lae'zel. 3 points of damage, that's a solid start, and with a bit of luck, Sylvia's mage hand should now be able to throw another axe for the killing blow. Okay, so that's a miss, but we still have our cleric, who will first of all once again receive some items to drop, before she can then take aim herself. And there we go, Commander Zhalk is dead and we unlock the Devils in the Details achievement, definitely not an easy one to obtain, especially not on this difficulty. Now, you may have also just noticed that the Mind Flayer is no longer on our side. As soon as Zhalk goes down, he turns on us, completely ignoring that the two Cambions have already joined the fight. That is why timing is everything in this fight. You don't want to kill Zhalk too quickly, but you also don't want to leave him alive for too long. Either way, we are now in a bit of a pickle, because Sylvia here is by far the closest target for the Mind Flayer, and unfortunately, he is up next. And yes, indeed, it had to happen. He hits the tentacle lash and Miss Hairyfoot goes down. So, what does this mean? Well, she's not dead, at least not yet. Instead, she will now need to make death saving throws. 3 fails and she dies, 3 successes and she lives. Alternatively, we can also just throw another healing potion at her to get her back up on her feet immediately.
Everything's focused on us now. Let's get to the transponder and get out of here.
Still, we are not in the clear just yet. If we move away with Sylvia, the Mind Flayer will get a free opportunity attack unless we use the disengage action. But, having just recovered from unconsciousness, we don't have an action on this turn. What we do have is our bonus action, which we can thankfully use with success to shove the Mind Flayer away, clearing the path for Sylvia's retreat. Now, we might get unlucky and have the Mind Flayer pursue. Although the Cambions are up first and will most likely engage him as the nearest target, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Okay, so the first Cambion moves in, and unfortunately it looks like Sylvia is once again the target. This time, however, she luckily survives after taking just 1 point of damage. The other Cambion then swoops in and melee attacks the Mind Flayer, and that should keep him occupied at least for now. So, our job at this point is to tactically get involved in this fight so that neither side gains the upper hand too early. In practice, this means focusing entirely on the Cambions, who would otherwise be able to overwhelm the Mind Flayer pretty quickly. Still, we don't need to do this recklessly, so let's take a turn with Lae'zel here to recast her mage hand before it expires, and then we can have her take care of some looting. Unfortunately, us cannot do that, otherwise it would be the perfect task for it, considering that it can't attack from range. After retreating a bit further with our mage hand, we are then once again giving a healing potion to Shadowheart for her to throw it at Sylvia, who is definitely not in the clear just yet. The Mind Flayer then once again proves himself as the MVP of this fight by mind-blasting both Cambions, and even though he only succeeds against one, the 25 points of damage here are huge. Even better than that, however, is the fact that stunned creatures automatically fail their saving throw against fairy fire, so let's cast that a second time now with Sylvia, this time targeting all 3 enemies. Okay, so only the stunned Cambion is affected, but still, that's also the one closest to us, so it should make things easier. Miss Hairyfoot will now retreat, looting a few bodies along the way, but overall staying as far back as possible. The same goes for us, who can't really do anything. It is important that it survives the fight though, so we're not going to put it in harm's way. The Cambion that is not stunned then attacks the Mind Flayer for 7 points of damage, while the other one can't act at all, so it's back to Lae'zel, who will now shoot it with advantage. Following her 4 points of damage, we send in her Mage Hand next, and that one connects 2 for 3 points. Mage Hand number 2 follows suit, hitting for 2 points of damage, and because we would like to keep hitting things, at least with our humanoid squad members, let us now cast Bless again, which is about to wear off after this turn. This now gives us a fresh 10 turns, and considering that we only have 7 left to make our escape, that will be plenty. The Mind Flayer's tentacle lash then hits the cambion in the back, and that's good because we are already taking care of the other one. For a change, however, with another spell, the Vicious Mockery cantrip from Sylvia. This will give the cambion disadvantage on its next attack, so it's another way to protect the Mind Flayer, who at this point sits at about half health.
Bloody work.
As a neat side effect, it also deals a few points of damage, perhaps not quite as much as the crossbow, but factoring in resistances, it comes close. Unfortunately, despite one of them having disadvantage, both cambions then hit their attacks for a total of 12 points of damage, and don't get me wrong, we do want the Mind Flayer dead eventually, but ideally not before at least one of the cambions goes down. So at this point we are now transferring a caustic bulb over to Lae'zel, who will then drop it, retreat and leave a mage hand to throw it, not at the enemies, but instead at the ground. Afterwards we can use Shadowheart's Firebolt cantrip to light the area on fire. And just like that, we now have an easily accessible way to dip our weapons and to get a small damage bonus from fire damage. Again, not a lot of damage and the patch here on the ground won't last long, but the fire applied to the weapon will last for 3 turns, so I think it's worth it. And indeed, our Githyanki ally connects despite a range penalty, and the extra point of damage bumps her up from 2 to 3 points. Don't worry though, we will increase our damage output significantly in just a moment. Another hand axe throw meanwhile misses its target, and with that it's back to the Mind Flayer. He continues to target the enemy further away from us and once again succeeds with the tentacle lash, and so we can slowly start taking risks, like moving a bit closer with Sylvia here to get off a crossbow shot. And lovely, that's another 4 points of damage. Let's see if the Cambions retaliate. Right, that's 10 more damage against the Mind Flayer. At the moment we're keeping all 3 of them nice and even health-wise, which is great, but we should also get to killing them soon, so let's use Lae'zel's special piercing shot action to inflict gaping wounds. And that's a critical, hitting for a whopping 7 points of damage. Much more important than that, however, is that gaping wounds has now been applied, so the Cambion will take additional damage for the next 2 turns. And since we are slowly starting to run out of hand axes, we are also dropping some daggers now. Mage hand number 1, however, still gets to throw another axe. That's another 2 points of damage, and the Cambion is starting to look rough with only 17 hit points remaining. And after the dagger throw scores another critical hit, we are down to 14. So we might just get into killing territory soon, which is good considering the clock is ticking. And with Shadowheart now hitting for 6 points here, I think the end is coming closer.
Time to strike.
The Mind Flayer then unfortunately steals our kill, completely wasting the 21 points of damage, but still, let's not complain. Cambion number 1 is down, and with 4 turns remaining, we have 2 enemies left, both with about a third of the hit points remaining. So, at this point, I think it's time to play things a bit more aggressively, which is why we are now dashing right into the middle of things with Miss Harryfoot. Doing so not only allows us to recover a good number of hand axes, but it also allows us to loot Commander Zhalk.
Stop the intruders! They must not escape!
From his body we can recover a suit of scale mail, a medium armor, and that's all we need for now, so let's jump back out of there. But don't worry, we are far from done. Using another dash action we can now also get us right next to Sylvia, and that's it for now, but don't worry, the best is yet to come.
So much for peace.
The Mind Flayer meanwhile receives another 10 points of damage, bringing it down to 27 hit points, and I think it's time that we start taking revenge for its betrayal, so let's have Lae'zel take the first shot. Unfortunately though that misses, but not to worry, we have plenty of other options, including that potion of speed that we picked up after the first fight of the video, so let us now transfer that over to Shadowheart and have her drop it. Before we use it though, let's throw another axe with our mage hand, which once again misses. So at this point we are sending Shadowheart over to cluster with the others, and while she's here she might as well attack the Mind Flayer too, and let's use the piercing shot with her as well. Alright, 7 points of damage and gaping wounds applied, despite the game telling us that the Mind Flayer succeeded on the saving throw. Best if we not question that and just end our turn. The Mind Flayer meanwhile continues to just hit attack after attack, the Cambion now down to 25 hit points, and at this point I think it's time for the grand finale. Bardic Inspiration on Lae'zel gives the person with the best weapon in the squad a better hit chance, and then we try our luck with a crossbow shot from Sylvia. And well, this is what things can look like if the target is not resistant, 14 points of damage here, which actually sets things up just perfectly for an absolutely ironic move. Let's try to kill the Mind Flayer with us, the Intellect Devourer, for all intents and purposes the Mind Flayer's pet, and possibly now his downfall. And there we go. Unfortunately, we do not get an achievement for that. Either way, at this point only the Cambion is left and we have 3 more turns to take it out, and we are moving us into melee range here to hopefully make it the target. With 27 hit points it should be able to take at least 2 attacks. And indeed, that's 9 points of damage, and at this point we need to be careful, because unlike our humanoid party members, us will not actually get to roll any death saves, so once it falls to 0 hit points, that's it, it's dead. However, I do feel confident that we won't let it come to that, as we have clustered our party here with good reason, as we can now throw the potion of speed so that it affects all 3 of them. And so Sylvia, Lae'zel and Shadowheart are now all hastened, which means for the next 3 turns they all get 1 extra action. They also receive a +2 bonus to their armor class, and you can see it above their character portraits. We have actually also leveled up, but that's a story for another time. Now, as you can see here, with haste applied, our movement range is also doubled, which means that Lae'zel can now get into striking range easily, and let's begin things with Pommel Strike, just to get the absolute most out of this turn. The attack, however, misses, and so we can follow it up with a regular sword swing. That connects for 13 points of damage, and we can now try a second time. Unfortunately though, that misses and still burns the Bardic Inspiration, which is a shame. Still, Lae'zel is not the only one who can attack twice this turn, but let's play it safe. After all, we might just be able to kill the Cambion right here and now. So once again, we are picking up all the hand axes in reach, transfer them over to Shadowheart and then have her drop them, before we then double cast her Sacred Flame cantrip. Nothing too powerful, but at least the Cambion is not resistant to it. And while the first attack misses, the second one does not and brings the Cambion down to only 8 hit points. And I have to admit, it would be awfully funny if we could now kill it with our mage hands. For some strange reason though, even after playing around with it for a while, I just couldn't get the other mage hand to throw the axe, and so we can now bring it back to Miss Harryfoot and us. And while we do have 2 crossbow shots with Sylvia at 50% hit chance each, not only is the Cambion resistant to the damage, but Vicious Mockery actually has a 55% hit chance, not to mention that we can use it twice for twice the chance at disadvantage on the next Cambion attack.
Baldur, the wit on you! Hey! Fudge-fondling Fustelarian!
Right, just 1 point of damage, that certainly could have gone better. Nonetheless, for its next attack, the Cambion now does have disadvantage, so as we finish things up with us here who misses its attack, we should be safe for at least 1 more round.
Nothing will stand in my way.
Well, once again, Vicious Mockery not working as I had hoped. Our Intellect Devourer companion taking a further 11 points of damage. 1 more hit like that and it will be gone. So let's make sure it doesn't come to that as we bring things back to Lae'zel. And there we go. With 2 turns left on the timer, we have now successfully managed to defeat every single enemy in the area. Unfortunately, there is no achievement for that either, but believe me, it is incredibly difficult, and despite all the prep work we did, the fight here could have gone much differently. However, our efforts as well as our luck are rewarded, as both of the Cambions here carry some fantastic early game loot, lots of gold, powerful potions and poisons, as well as some alchemy ingredients. The Mind Flayer meanwhile actually paling in comparison with just a single pearl. The 2 Cambions meanwhile carrying the real loot, which will definitely give us a bit of a head start, even if we just end up selling most of it. But I think it's only fair that we are being rewarded for pulling this off. Now, one final thing we want to do here before we then eventually connect the transponder to escape the ship, let us now pick all of those hand axes and daggers back up. After all, we might just need them again for a combat situation similar to this one, and even if we don't, they might just fetch us a few pieces of gold. With Lae'zel, we can then also collect one final Void Bulb, and after Shadowheart has grabbed the last hand axe, we can see the area has been thoroughly looted. Not a single enemy remains who is not yet dead, and not a single item remains that is not yet in our possession, which now brings us to the fun part, transferring all of that stuff over to Sylvia's inventory. After all, she is the main character, and despite being a small, weak halfling, she can in fact carry all of it. However, I will be the first to admit that this is entirely optional. Now, as you can see, we even have the luxury of waiting for one more turn until we activate the transponder. That is what we should do now though, otherwise if the turn runs out, it will be game over.
The Helm's alien transponder. You've made it in time. You half expected your memories to return once you were free of the Mind Flayer ship. But your past is still an aching void. If you don't find a way to remove the tadpole burrowed in your brain soon, your future will be as blank as your past. Your head whispers vengeance. You cannot wait to slice your way forth, seeking whatever wrought this tragedy upon you.
Alright, and there we are, with 3 achievements now unlocked and the first tutorial mission thoroughly completed. As you can see, we now find ourselves on a ravaged beach with bits of the crashed Nautiloid all around us, and most importantly, entirely on our own. Whatever happens to our other party members, what we can do about that Mind Flayer tadpole in our brain, and how the story proceeds from here, well, all of those are questions for another time. Again, I am not entirely sure yet whether or not this is going to be a one-off video or the beginning of something more. I just really wanted to play some Baldur's Gate and felt like the first mission, especially the big fight at the end of it, would be worth showing off. So this perhaps as a small taste of what Baldur's Gate 3 could look like on Pete Complete. Let me know if you enjoyed it, I most certainly did. And with that, I think we'll leave Sylvia Harryfoot be for now. But who knows, she might just return sooner or later for the next chapter in her grand adventure. For today at least, let's wrap things up right here. If you liked the video, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. Also, feel free to subscribe for more completionist content like this, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or if you're interested in that whole naming rights tier and a few other cool rewards, then check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.